Today on Impulse, I'm joined by my good friend Sam Moy from over at Infinite Backlog to talk about No Man's Sky and whether or not it's worth your time in 2019. Now, for those unaware, I actually made a video titled, Is No Man's Sky Still Worth Playing a Year Later, way back in 2017. In fact, it was the very first video I ever made for Destructoid. That specific video more or less covers everything from the disaster of a launch all the way up to Atlas Rises. So if you're looking for an in-depth look at that stuff, I'll be sure to include it at the end of the video or down below in the description. Since then, however, there have been a plethora of new updates, from general bug fixes, quality of life improvements, to new content and even features. So, let's get right into it.
Really changed a lot since it first launched. I actually remembered you reviewing it for the channel way back when. And at the time, when they were announcing it and whatnot, they were all saying that, you would never be able to meet anyone, or was it you could meet anyone?
It was really highly unlikely, as they put it, and I remember they made this claim that, like, the only way you would actually be able to figure out what you look like is if another player told you what you look like. And as it turns out, on launch day, I remember specifically 2 streamers met up with one another on the same planet, and they couldn't even see one another, so it was a bit of a shit show.
I think they sort of introduced finding other players, but you would like a floating orb or something way back when too.
Yeah, around the time Atlas Rises came out, you were sort of this weird floating orb with, like, very limited interactivity. And you could leave, like, messages and things like that, but it was really just kind of wasn't really proper multiplayer in the sense that what we have now. Now you have just, like, straight up multiplayer where you can just invite a friend into your game, and on PC it's up to 32 players, which is crazy, but it's only up to 8 people on console. So if you're playing on PS4 or Xbox One, your chances are still, like, pretty dang slim that you'll actually run into somebody. But if you decide to invite people or anything like that, or friends, you can do the story together, you can explore, you can build a base, you can do pretty much anything you can normally that you could do in single player.
And the beauty of it is that if you join in, you'll automatically be put in the same system as the host player. So you don't have to worry about, going through your galactic map hoping to find where your friend is.
Yeah, it's pretty handy, especially if you want to just, like, be on the opposite end of the galaxy suddenly, or even closer to the center. You can potentially just join a friend who is, like, near the center. But anyways, as for the multiplayer itself, they have added some new content as well into the multiplayer, including, like, a brand new hub that you can summon, the space anomaly. Normally you'd have to kind of, like, run into that randomly. Now you can just, like, straight up summon it.
The only issue though with the big giant hub though is, although you're in the same lobby as your friend, you somehow get separated. I think once you go into the space anomaly, because if I remember right, we had trouble trying to even find each other, to even try and do a mission through the anomaly.
In that sense, the multiplayer is still a bit confusing at times, and on that note, they added multiplayer missions in the hub place known as kind of the Nexus, and I expected these to be a lot more. I came off Red Dead Online maybe expecting, like, some sort of cooperative missions or something like that, or things you could really do together that were kind of exciting. And instead it was just like, yeah, go down to a planet and scan plants.
Or shoot so many space pirates.
Yeah, which were missions you could pretty much already get in the single player, and I guess now you could do them with random people or with friends. But at the same time, we had trouble even, like, meeting inside this hub place, let alone, like, starting a mission together. Like, I could not wrap my head around it. I ended up just kind of giving up on that stuff. So in terms of multiplayer, it all works as intended, in the sense that if you want to invite somebody to hop in your game and do more of the campaign and some of the more stuff you could do is in a single player aspect, but some of the Nexus stuff is a little bit miffed.
And hopefully, they'll get that sorted soon.
Yeah. Bases now can also be built anywhere on the planet. Before they were kind of restricted to, like, certain spots on the planet. You'd have to, like, find a beacon and scan, and then if you got lucky, it would find a specific habitable base location. Now you can just, like, pick a spot anywhere, for better or for worse. Some spots, like the base, will, like, glitch right into the ground. I had that happen a few times, just trying to find a new spot for my base. But they also added teleporters as well, which can also be built anywhere now. So before, teleporters could only be built I think specifically at your shelter or your base or whatever. Now they can be built pretty much anywhere.
And the neat thing with that is, as someone entering your game, when I went back into my own single player game, I think I was able to visit like the systems that I'd been to while I was in multiplayer with you, or if you left the session and I was playing by myself again, I could just use that to teleport back to where I was before and just carry on from my system. It's pretty neat.
Yeah, it's really helpful if you find a planet full of resources that you really need, that's really far away, or if you just really like a specific planet but you're not too sure if you want to build your base there yet, you can just set up a teleporter, and then eventually if you decide to head back there, it's a pretty easy process of making your way back there. And on that note, in terms of more quality of life improvements, a third-person view was added. Although, admittedly, I'm not really crazy about it. I never really used it. It kind of gives me like the same janky vibe that the Elder Scrolls and Bethesda-made Fallout games kind of have. Like the third person just doesn't look that great to me.
I can't say I really used third person myself when I was playing it. Feels more like a first person thing to me when it comes to this game.
Yeah, but you can now look at your character, which is interesting. You can pick also between like different races to be, between the deck and stuff like that, or playing as an anomaly, which is what I went with, which kind of just looks like a typical human-looking spacesuit kind of fellow, like on the cover of the game. I'm more of a fan of that. But character customization is a thing, which is pretty neat.
Yeah, and I think you can change your appearances. I think at your nearest space station, there's like a cosmetic platform where you can just step on and change your appearance.
But freighters also have some new things. The giant ships you could buy and use as transport ships and teleport with a lot easier to different systems. They also now have the ability to basically assemble like fleets of frigates that you can send on missions. Think like those little meta games that you would see in stuff like Assassin's Creed Black Flag, or even, Metal Gear Solid The Phantom Pain, where you can send out basically units to do like these missions, these little time tasks, and then a little timer will tick down, and then you'll get basically more items from that, or various things to craft with, which is pretty helpful. If you manage to build a pretty decent sized fleet, you can gather a ton of resources just by sending those out each day.
And the beauty with freighters is it's also one of those things that you can summon when you're on planet.
If I have any kind of nitpicks, it's that the frigates themselves are cool, like building this actual fleet of frigates and actual like physical ships that you can see flying around your giant freighter. To repair them though, it's not just some sort of like little menu thing. You actually have to get in your ship, your smaller ship, and fly to your frigate, land on the frigate, get out, and then actually go up to like some little thing and repair it. And you gotta do that for each and every frigate that got damaged. And at first it was pretty neat. I was like, oh, this is really hands-on, kind of cool. But when you've been sending out these frigates to do missions like every couple of days, and then like a week into this, and you're still having to do this every single day, it got old.
I bet it would also be a lot of fun once you get a lot of frigates and having to deal with each and every single one of them. Now, one of the things I did like initially with No Man's Sky was how varied a lot of the planets were, and I think they've added to that, have they?
Oh yeah, they definitely expand out of the biomes. There's a number of different biomes now. And if there's one thing I still really liked about No Man's Sky, it's kind of the aesthetics of it. It doesn't take on kind of like the traditional modern day sci-fi approach to space and more like planetary exploration games. It really takes on this like 70s color aesthetic of like bright yellows and paints and stuff like that, and it really shows in terms of like the designs on some of the ships and everything like that. It looks absolutely fantastic. If you look up like 70s Star Trek concept photos on Google for when they were trying to bring back Star Trek before they made the original motion picture and stuff, a lot of those like ship designs and drawings it feels like it's straight out of No Man's Sky, and I kind of love it. But as for the biomes themselves, there are some insane biomes. I remember one of the first more exotic ones I landed on was like this bubble planet, where like everything on the planet was spherical. In terms of the animal life, the plants, the rocks, everything was round. So the only life on the planet were these like weird bubble things that were like dripping from their bottoms. It was something.
Yeah, and I think I came across a planet where it was nothing but like looks like floating nuts from a hardware store, and and they were like wedged into the ground, floating in midair, and they were sort of all over the place. It was interesting stuff. Now, you probably dabbled more in this than I did, but you were actually able to mount creatures.
Yeah, one of the new updates that they introduced in the or one of the new features, I should say, that they introduced in the Beyond update was the ability to kind of harvest certain resources from animals as well as feed them. And if you feed them enough, you'll be able to mount them and ride them. So sometimes you're just riding on this tiny little thing that doesn't make any sense whatsoever. Other times you ride these giant dinosaur tier animals, and it's not really useful in any meaningful way. You can hardly control them, but it's fun to look at for a couple of seconds. In terms of other like more cool updates that I really enjoyed, they added this update called The Abyss, which is basically underwater bases and more aquatic stuff that they've added, a more focused approach to underwater environments and plants and animal life and stuff like that. So now when you land on a planet that's like 90% ocean, there's at least some interesting stuff to see under the waves. That said, building an underwater base is visually really cool, but it's more or less the same thing, and it's a little more of a pain to build underwater because you're constantly having to look for oxygen and things like that to basically fuel up your suit constantly. And I was on a frozen planet as well, so despite being underwater, I was also freezing to death constantly, so it was real pain.
You can build like an underwater submarine vehicle thing akin to Thunderbird 4, I think, yeah, where you can sort of just explore underwater, if I remember right.
That specific vehicle also includes its own sort of set of side missions known as the Dreams of the Deep. It's a series of side missions you can do, and it's kind of spooky. You're like following the logs of various scientists that were doing underwater experiments, and it all went bad. Honestly, though, it was pretty forgettable. On the planet I was stuck on, the random generation for it kept having me go insanely long distances, like to a point where I was driving this underwater like vehicle thing for upwards of 15 minutes to get to the next mission marker, and I was just like, all right, I'm kind of over this.
But I suppose the biggest thing they added to No Man's Sky,
outside of multiplayer,
yes, of course, is VR. They added VR support, and I dabbled in a bit of this because I have a PlayStation VR headset, and the game, when you start it up, it gives you the option to teleport or move around. So I was using a controller for this because I just feel more comfortable than using the PlayStation Move control, and so I chose to move around, and it was pretty neat. You just got to get used to the fact that instead of using the analog sticks to look up and down, you just have to look up and down with your actual head. I found exploring space and planets was great in VR. I do enjoy dogfighting in VR, though depending on how fast you're going, you can get a little bit sort of disorientated. But that wasn't a huge issue of me. You get used to it eventually. But I did come across a couple of issues when I was playing the game in VR. So I don't know if I don't know if it's a PlayStation VR limitation, but I had a lot of pop-in issues moving around, flying around on planets. I also had a few pop-in issues sort of when arriving on planets, like I'd be flying above the planet and I'd suddenly get damaged because I hit a tree or something that decided to pop up a few seconds later.
I can only suspect that was a PlayStation VR limitation. I imagine if you're playing this on on a Vive or something like that, there's probably little to no graphical changes whatsoever. And
the only other major issue I had was I found that the UI in the ship was a bit blurry in comparison to the inventory UI. But 9 times out of 10, I'm not even looking at the UI in the ship anyway, because I'm more or less either shooting another ship down or flying to a planet in which I'm only just keeping an eye on how long it's going to take for me to get there.
Would you say this is a system seller for VR? Like, would you say this is something worth getting VR for? Because I have heard some high praise from some people, but I'm just not too sure.
I think when it comes to VR, it was definitely something that I would consider getting a VR headset for. It's sort of it was a lot better than I was expecting it to be, because one thing I like in a game is exploring, and this really scratches the whole itch of exploring and tying it in with virtual reality instead of a lot of the other stuff I see, VR being used for. So I wouldn't buy a VR specifically for it, but it would heavily influence whether I get one or not.
Alright, well, pretty high praise nonetheless, but in terms of overall nitpicks, I would say, if I have any lasting things that I hope they still try and improve, it's the inventory. The UI and inventory in this game, even since launch, has still been kind of a mess. Just navigating through the really clunky inventory is still a bit of a pain. They've improved it to a point where now you can more or less stack an unlimited amount of objects and resources and whatnot, to a point anyways. But outside of the UI and inventory stuff, there's a lot of crashes here and there still, the odd one. And it's not a huge thing, but it's still pretty annoying at times, especially in multiplayer, where I don't know how the saving works or when you're base building, maybe, I'm not too sure, but there was this one point where you joined my game and I crashed after I spent a solid 2-3 hours setting up this power system on my base.
I remember that because your game crashed. I stayed in your game, and you rejoined. Well, you joined my session while I was in your planet from your game.
Yeah, thinking my base would still be there and whatnot.
Half of it was gone.
Yeah, which was annoying. So, the multiplayer, like I said, there are still some issues.
Now, one thing I did like about the inventory, and I just have to put this out here, is you're able to send resources and stuff to your friend if you're playing multiplayer too, and that was something I do like, especially if you're trying to find a particular resource. Your friend has it, but you don't.
Yeah, you can also get an upgrade for your ship as well that allows you to send it from a much greater distance. Normally, if you don't have that upgrade, you have to be basically near the player. But in conclusion, though, is No Man's Sky worth playing in 2019? For me, absolutely. At launch, I railed on No Man's Sky. You can go watch the Infinite Backlog review for it. I torrented this game. And now I would honestly consider it one of my most memorable games from this generation in terms of how much I played it and how much I've explored. I put in over 100 hours in No Man's Sky now, and I have a lot of fond memories now from this game, so... if you're still not crazy about that core loop, though, of exploring different planets and systems, and you're not crazy about crafting and base building and things like that, then overall, I would probably say this game still isn't for you. But in terms of all the content they've been adding, it's ridiculous. I can't not say this game is not worth it anymore. It's fantastic. The only thing I kind of regret is, and I'm sure they regret this too, is I wish they brought this to early access on Steam instead of this full-blown AAA release with this mass marketing campaign and everything like that. If this would have released as an early access thing back then, a lot of those issues that people brought up would have been a lot more forgivable. And if it launched now as we're out of early access kind of thing now, I think the reception of this game would be a hell of a lot more positive.
I think No Man's Sky is a typical textbook example of how something that was so critically negative, I suppose, at launch has just turned around and just made leaps and bounds in terms of improvements.
Yeah, and a lot of that boiled down to listening to its fan base and delivering on content. If you go to the No Man's Sky Reddit, at launch, that place was a hellscape of people bashing Hello Games and mocking Sean Murray. That place was basically... You couldn't go there and have a conversation about that game. It was just a terrible place to be if you were some sort of nihilist or you just wanted to sit back and watch the shit show unfold. But nowadays, if you go to the No Man's Sky Reddit, it's one of the most wholesome communities ever. They love the game. They even set up a billboard down the street from the developer of Hello Games. They actually paid for a billboard thanking them so that the employees could see their own community thanking them in in real life on a billboard. It's nuts. But what do you guys think? Have you been playing No Man's Sky recently? Let us know down below on how you think the game is shaping up.
And if you want to go for something different, of course, there's the odd Infinite Backlog review. It's mostly just me at the moment, but I try to get something up from time to time.
And for more written content such as news, reviews, original features, and more, be sure to head on over to Destructoid.com.